enough that when we landed in all those states in the South, it was our labor that kept the Europeans alive. It was our love for life and our love for mankind that allowed us to treat them kind, to cook food, to nurse their children, to take care of them when they were sick, because we had a know-how and a brain power with farming and taking care of land and taking care of the human bodies that they didn't have. And many of them were not able to withstand the ride from Europe to America. Many of them came with diseases, and many of those diseases were cured by African human beings, not the slaves. So in case you didn't know, this is also the education show. What I want to make real clear is that the biggest part of this show tonight is the education component, or one of the biggest parts. And the biggest education experience I'm going to share with you tonight is African human beings were African human beings. They were not slaves. They were enslaved. And for us African Americans to refer to our ancestors is not, we're diminishing their love and their work and their commitment to live in a way that in 2010, we don't have to do that anymore. I mean, we don't have to refer to ourselves as, or our ancestors as the slaves, because they weren't the slaves, they were human beings who were enslaved. And the level of power that I get to walk in and I get to experience when I hear my grandchildren correct somebody and say, you know, I'm sorry, my grandma said we weren't slaves, we were human beings who were enslaved. That sense of pride and that sense of respect and that sense of self-respect and self-esteem that I experience when I hear my grandchildren say that, it just takes me to a level of just excitement that it's hard for me to describe. And so since I'm not a selfish person and I'm not a greedy person, I don't want to be the only one having that experience. I want the entire planet. You know, if you're watching this show on the internet and you're in London or you're in Africa or you're in Holland or you're in Arizona, understand that for us to honor African human beings takes us to another level in our humanity and as people in this world. So we don't have to refer to Africans as the slaves anymore. Starting from this moment on, I don't care where you are in this country or in this world, have the right to refer to African human beings as that. And by doing that, you increase this world knowledge base in a way that there's no telling where we're going to be 10 years from now. I mean, we could literally be feeding every starving person on the planet 10 years from now by just acknowledging that African human beings were not slaves, they were human beings. And it was their labor and their love and their commitment to life and to God that gave them the courage to keep going when most people would have given up. So that's the first lesson. The second lesson is love is free. My ancestors, African human beings, had the ability to love past their experience, and that love is the only reason I'm sitting here now. The love that my ancestors had for themselves, for other human beings, for the world, for God, for the planet, superseded the pain and agony that they were existing in. It superseded. And because of that, they managed to survive conditions that most human beings could not survive. You know, watching their loved ones being lynched and being tortured and being branded and them experiencing branding. Those things alone, I think, I mean, I can't even imagine what it felt like what it would feel like to experience that kind of torture and torment. However, I do know what it feels like for 10 generations later to still be struggling as a result of the human enslavement of African people. I bear witness to that. I do know what it feels like to walk in a store, in a department store, and have somebody follow me around because, they think I'm going to steal something. 10 generations later, I know what that feels like. I do know what it feels like to sit in first class and have 5 people ask me if I'm in the right seat. I've had that experience. I do know what that feels like. I do know what it feels like to hear people talk about, let's say just talk about the city of Oakland in a way that there's no acknowledgement that everybody who lives in Oakland is a human being. Everybody who lives in Oakland is not incarcerated, is not smoking crack, is not carrying a gun. Everybody who lives in Oakland is a human being. Everybody who lives in Oakland has a desire for good education, has a desire for stable, solid housing, has a desire to eat a decent meal, has a desire to take their children to the park and play and not be afraid because there are neighborhoods in Oakland that have been infested with drugs, like in San Francisco, like in Berkeley, like in Vallejo, like in Sacramento, like in Philadelphia, New York, Chicago. The conditions that are robbing this country of its joy and its beauty in spite of the damages that other human beings had to experience and the pain and agony that other human beings had to experience for us to get here. Even in spite of all that tragedy, this nation